This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman
and Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at Kevin Kautzman and at Brad Kelly.
Okay, welcome back to the Art of Darkness podcast, a show about the dark side of creativity. We have got an interesting episode today. It's a little bit different. We're going to do a follow-up on an episode we've already released on the great Pamela Colman Smith, and we've brought in somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. So,
wait, what?
And I'm not talking about
to me.
And I'm not talking about my co-host, Kevin Kautzman.
Oh, no, of course not. This is a very special Halloween episode.
That's correct,
of
yes.
Art of Darkness at artofdarkpod.com. Yeah, really excited, Brad.
Yeah. So I'm going to introduce, we have with us Elizabeth Foley O'Connor, who was gracious enough to give us some time on the pre-Halloween. Tomorrow's Halloween, actually, but if you're an adult, tonight is Saturday, so this is when you're actually celebrating Halloween. So Elizabeth Foley O'Connor is the author of basically the academic biography on Pamela Colman Smith. It came out in March of this year of 2021. No, is that not right? She's shaking her head. She's keeping us on track. This is great.
That's fantastic. Yeah, Elizabeth.
It actually came out in September. It was supposed to come out in March, but it was delayed due to COVID. It came out in July in England and September in the States.
Okay, great. And she is she's associate professor of English at Washington College, as well as the director of the Gender Studies program. Okay, and she has, in addition to the Pamela Colman Smith biography, which we'll have links to on the show. She's also a major contributor to another amazing book that came out. I'm not sure when Pamela Colman Smith, The Untold story came out, but it's a beautiful, is my primary reference for the episode we did. It's a beautiful coffee table edition with amazing images. A lot of biographical material, a lot of archival material. If you like Pamela Colman Smith, and you should, that'd be a nice Christmas gift for somebody to buy you, for sure. So anything else, Elizabeth, that you want to share with what you're doing right now before we dig into Pamela?
No, I mean, other than teaching, I'm happy to talk about Pamela, and the Untold story actually came out in 2018, but it's still widely available.
Yeah, and I can't stress enough. The work you did in it is amazing, and the overall package is just I'm really happy to have it. I've bought a bunch of books to do this show, and I'm kind of like giving some of them away and things, and that one's staying. So, so thank you for that, and thank you for the new book as well. How did you? I guess we'll talk about our episode a little bit, but I'm just curious, how did you come across Pamela Colman Smith? How did you decide this was something you were excited about, studying? What's the origin story for you?
Everybody always asks that, and they assume that I came to Pamela through the tarot deck. And I will say that I first heard of Pamela and saw I will call it the Smith-Waite deck, when I was studying in Amsterdam in the 90s. And I had a roommate that was very into the cards and was constantly wanting to do readings. And I was struck even then about how gorgeous the cards were, and about especially the gender fluid figures that I was not prepared for, but I was not a tarot practitioner. I was, it was just kind of a passing thing. I went on to become a journalist, and then I went to grad school, and it really wasn't until I was finishing up my dissertation, which was on something totally different than Pamela Colman Smith, and thinking about how to extend it. It was on novels in the 20s and 30s that depict women in the city in Irish and Caribbean authors. And I started Googling, and I eventually found Pamela's Anansi stories. And I became obsessed with them. And that was in 2011, in November, actually, and slowly, over the next decade or so, I became more and more just fascinated. And I initially presented at a conference on her Anansi stories, and then I found out that she, in 1905, went back to and self-published on her Green Sheaf Press Chim Chim and Other Stories, where she revised some of the stories, not all of them, and became, did a little digging and found out how she was connected to so many important figures of the late 19th and early 20th century. And yeah, it really went off from there.
Yeah, that's makes sense to me. I mean, I came to her through the tarot, but once I started sort of digging into her life, you sort of realize that there's so many connections. She's sort of a node to all of these different things. It's pretty amazing that and you're doing a great job of contributing to make sure that she doesn't end up getting kind of forgotten to history.
Well, this is the thing about this Pamela Colman Smith episode we did, is that her erasure from that deck is one of the probably greatest crimes of art.
It felt like that to me. Yeah.
Yeah. And what is that all about?
Well, I mean, in some ways, and I mean, I think there's two answers to that question. There's a specific Pamela Colman Smith answer that I will want to give, but I think the general answer is that there's a lot of women and people of color whose contributions were overlooked or minimized or erased for any number of reasons. I mean, specifically in Pamela's case, in regards to the deck, right? It's named for A.E. Waite, the mystic, who asked her to do the designs, and then Ryder, who was publisher. And you talk a little bit about this in your first podcast, so I don't know how much you want me to go over, but I guess the short version is that, the famous account that A.E. Waite gives about having to spoon feed her all this information minimizes her contributions.
Absolutely, right.
And there's this great quote, right, that she wrote in a letter to Stieglitz, who put on her 3 exhibitions in New York, that it was a big job for very little cash. And it's true, it was a big job and she wasn't paid very much for it, but I do think that underemphasizes the importance, longstanding importance, I think the cards had for her, and that iconography played into her art, and that she continued to refer to tarot iconography even in her Bible and her hymnal that she had when she died. One of the things that I did find doing research for this book is that she started doing designs that weren't exactly the tarot designs, but that were very similar and include like a lot of symbolism that kind of prefigured the tarot designs in as early as 1907. And so this was something that she was interested in before Waite approached her, it appears. And, we don't know a lot about her involvement with the Order of the Golden Dawn. We know that she didn't get beyond the first level, the Zelator level. And, Waite kind of very dismissively says that she was only there for the spectacle, that she had to be spoon-fed, that she didn't, she wasn't into the kind of arcane mysticism that he was. But we don't know that. And
Right,
we don't
yeah.
know what she was or wasn't interested in. Maybe she just didn't want to advance, but still had a kind of private practice.
Well, I don't know a ton about Waite, but I mean, I've read a little bit about him, and I've read his companion writing to that deck, the Pictorial Key to the Tarot, and there's a ego that kind of radiates just from that text. There's some sort of
For
like,
sure.
and there's aspects where he's talking about the symbolism, and he sort of says that's reserved for for people who are more in it. And to me, the way they fit in the page, I think he came to that and said, I don't know what that means. And so and so just said, well, if you knew as much as you have to know as much as I do before you can understand the deep mystery of, but it reads like he doesn't actually get it. And I could be wrong, but
I think that's really funny, but I think that's a somewhat fair interpretation. I think that with any kind of occult or any kind of group where there's different grades and there's different material that's secret, there is a benefit, right, to keeping certain things separate. Maybe who knows why?
Right.
And maybe some of it might just be, this idea that things are separate. Part of it with Pamela is that other mind that he references in that passage, and it's unclear who the other mind is. Probably it's W.B. Yeats. And there was a lot of conflict in the Golden Dawn. I think it would take too much time to go into all of the conflict, but it's split. The short version is that Crowley destabilized things, and
no surprise there.
Wow! You can't mention Crowley without doing. You got to do the little
theme music.
I'm sorry, we had to.
I like it.
Yeah,
That's great.
Yeah. Boy, yeah. I was going to say, and I'm so sorry to interrupt, but
It's fine.
There's so much flim-flammery and just BS and sort of hiding their secrets and blah blah blah. Anyway, I knocked you off, but yes, there's a whole
there's a whole theatrical component to it, and then it gets hierarchical, and then you've got egos involved, and it becomes like there's nuggets of wisdom in there, and there's BS, and it's almost impossible for the common person to untie those knots and figure out what's what. That's
No, and I would agree. And we don't there's no archive, right, where the secret papers of the Order of the Golden Dawn have been fully kept. I mean, there's been a few things that have been released, but Waite and Yeats went into, when the split happened, Yeats and Waite went into different groups. It split off and formed different other groups that were connected. And Pamela went with Waite, but she still she had an early close mentorship and friendship with Yeats, and it's not that just ended right away.
That's no small thing. Yeats is a big deal, obviously, and we're going to do all these episodes about Yeats and about.
Oh, cool!
Yeah, we'll do a Crowley episode.
We're just saving up our power for the Crowley episode.
That's right.
Do you say Crowley or do you say Crowley, Elizabeth?
I think it's supposed to be Crowley.
Okay.
I think, but I don't know.
That's okay. Yeah. And so in that split, well, so first I have two things real quick. I just love this period and all of this history, and this business is so fascinating. Is it fair to say that it was a case of them sort of dismissing her as like a hired hand? Like, we hired you to do this work, but you're not going to receive the credit for it. Is that kind of a succinct way of putting it?
Like when you hire a typist or something.
I mean, he calls her the draftsman, right?
Right.
And or draftsman, draftsperson. I think it's draftsman, actually.
Yeah.
In the book, actually, I found in Pamela Colman Smith's Visitors book, there's a great picture that somebody drew, and it's not credited, but it's of Pamela and Waite together, supposedly working on the cards. Pamela has like a magician's hat on, and there's a little demon that is like on the desk with them.
Yeah.
And it seems that drawing, and I wish I knew who did it, makes it seem much more of a collaboration, but who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, they obviously had to have had chats about it. He gave her, one of the things that he even makes clear in that passage that you quoted is that he was much more focused on the major arcana, and she pretty much did. It seems like she had free reign to do what she wanted with the minor arcana.
Right, and so she borrowed some of that from the Solabusca deck, which is the only other deck with minor arcana figurative art. But I think it seems to me, not having studied the Solabusca, it seems to me there was a degree of invention on her part as well. So
for sure. And I mean, there's some similarities with the Solabusca, to be sure, but there's a lot of different things that she just kind of went off in her own direction. I don't know.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that's kind of exciting about it. And there is this amazing thing. So like you had a roommate who was throwing tarot and saw those cards, and the some of the key cards, like the Hanged Man or the Hermit, the stuff that is the most appealing to a general audience, some of that is like some of the most viewed art, period. Really.
No, for sure.
We thought we were Kevin and I were talking last night, and I think, Kevin, you found out that deck has sold 100 million copies approximately.
Over 100 million copies.
Yeah.
Right. So
that's something Stuart always talked about, for sure.
Unreal.
So so just the how deep into culture this stuff actually is, and then her name doesn't even get on it. It's hard for me to get over.
It's criminal.
Yeah. So let's talk about Pamela a little bit. I was reading through your book, and the one thing I like that you dipped into that we didn't dip into too much in the episode was her relationship to Swedenborgianism. Do you say Swedenborgianism?
I think so. Yeah,
okay.
Swedenborgianism. I'm not 100% sure.
It feels like
God
an extra syllable. It feels like there's an extra syllable in there.
That is a very unruly set of phonemes or whatever it is. Is that the right phonemes?
Phonemes.
Yeah, potato. Swedenborg. It's like it's a Swedish chef here. Right, all right.
Yeah, but so I think in our show we kind of presented it in passing, but as I'm reading through the biography now, it seems like not only was her family even more involved in that movement than I understood, she seems to have been even more influenced by it than I understood. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
Swedenborgianism?
No, and I do think her early exposure to Swedenborgianism was very important, was setting her up from a very early age to be interested in the spiritual. And one of the things that is maybe sets Swedenborgianism apart from other forms of Christianity is that it does have this close connection with the afterlife. Hold on for a second. I'm going to cough.
She's
let's vamp here. We'll do
okay.
So under the table here. We'll have to
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
That's so funny. Remember the theater of the mind. This is a radio. We're all in a room together talking about Pamela Colman Smith.
Yeah. So there's a primacy on the afterlife, and
there's a focus on the afterlife and close connection with those have departed, and I think that really set her up to be interested in spirits and ghosts. And she also spent time as a young adolescent in Jamaica and was exposed at an early age to Obeah, which I think connected with that. But her maternal grandparents were the first people in the United States to publish the works of Blake and also Swedenborg. And Blake, I think, is a key link here because Blake was also a Swedenborgianist. Swedenborgianist. Now I can't even say it myself. And he, famously, had different saints and people would come and have tea with him. And not that Pamela had anything like that, but that visionary connection with the other world is something that Pamela was very interested in. She was also very interested in Blake. And appears to have come to him only when she came back to England in 1900. At one point, she really wanted to do an edition of Blake's work and wanted W.B. Yeats to do the preface for it. It doesn't appear that that ever occurred, but she did reprint some poems by Blake in her Green Sheaf, which was one of her little magazines.
Yeah, you can see that. You can see that influence pretty strongly in the Green Sheaf and those other, the not only the pairing of the text and the images and the style of the images but the sort of DIY quality of some of this stuff, which I think Blake was somewhat engaged with as well. So yeah,
I think artistically, a lot of his illustrations for poems of innocence and experience are there too.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole nexus of artistic influences,
right,
I think.
Right. And I didn't quite understand until reading through your book either the how influential Swedenborg was on some very influential people in American culture. I mean, I wrote down like some of the names that popped up. You've got Emerson and Thoreau and who else is in there? Whitman, Howells, like a whole bunch of these people of that era who sort of defined this unruly American literature of that time.
I mean, Swedenborgianism kind of has fallen away, but was very much a part of the American spiritualist movement after the Civil War, right? Yeah. And a lot of those thinkers that you just met or just mentioned were influenced by him to various degrees.
Right. And less so in Europe than in America, right? Was the Swedenborg influence?
And so the Swedenborg was in Europe too, but I mean, of this late 19th century, it was American spiritualism Swedenborgianism was key, and it was very popular. Both of Pamela's parents were from these prominent Brooklyn families, and Swedenborgianism was kind of huge in New York in the 1890s. It was also quite there's a large Swedenborgian community in Manchester, which is actually where she grew up, mostly in England. You guys rightly said that she was born in Pimlico, actually right near Victoria Station. But then when she was 2, they moved to Manchester as part of our father's job for a mercantile company.
If we had to define Swedenborgianism, what I know about it is that it's sort of a ultra-Protestant, mystic version of Christianity. And Swedenborg claimed to have visited heaven in his visions. And is that a fair summary? I think the three of us, it's a little inside baseball. I think we all know, but it's like for people who don't, what on earth is this?
No, that's exactly right. I'm just going to try to I was just going to try to find the spot in the book where I define it, but I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, do it. We're very good at covering for each other. That's all we do.
I think there's also a thing too where it's got a strain of individualism to it. Very much like, because the idea is this guy Swedenborg, well, he sat down and he had a vision. There's like this way in which it's you talked about, Kevin, like an ultra Protestantism, right? It's like everybody can have these divine experiences.
Literally a direct experience of the divine.
Not only can you read the Bible yourself, but like you can actually commune with
be
the
like
divine.
Enoch can go visit the angels and all the rest of it. I could see that having an appeal to certainly that period in history. Sure. I love how all these things start to connect. You've got Yeats, you've got Crowley. We're not that far away from Virginia Woolf. You're talking about Victoria Station. Well, the protagonist in the Importance of Being Earnest was left in the baggage room in the cloakroom at Victoria Station. The line is immaterial. That is my favorite, funniest line in all of theater. I love that.
It's a great one.
I love it. Yes, Elizabeth, it seems you may have found the passage. Did you find it?
I did. Okay. And it's so the revelation given through Swedenborg was to teach people born at the end of the Christian church how to see through or beyond the literal understanding of the Bible to the deeper spiritual meaning.
Right.
Swedenborg wanted the faithful to connect directly with angelic beings through the use of their reason. A defining element in his writing was a belief in a spirit world that directly affected human life and the possibility of communicating with this world through paranormal means.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I'm a Swedenborgian. I don't know. I gotta do a little more reading, but so I don't want to.
That could have something to do with what's in your vape pen there, Brad.
I don't want to. I don't want to keep it.
Yeah, Elizabeth, may I ask you? Have you? I know. I want to ask him. Have you seen this documentary, American Mystic? If not, I think you would appreciate it. It's a very fine documentary, and it weaves the thread between three mystics. One is a young Lakota man out in South Dakota who's preparing to do the Sundance. Another is a neo-pagan witch out in California. And the third is a young black man from upstate New York who is involved in laying of hands and the spiritism and everything. I just think you would appreciate it. Listeners might appreciate it. The little sly trick of this documentary is that it's making a case that film too is a kind of mystic expression. And I think it's a wonderful film. And it makes me think of that for what it's worth. Yeah. And that your summary of Swedenborg there was really right on. Yeah. So kind of this direct, you're talking about like the end of the church. We don't need these priests as intermediaries. We're going to figure out how to have this direct connection.
Experience.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So I didn't mean to make this an episode all about this subject, but it was interesting to me. So, a couple other things I'm sort of thinking about as I'm processing your book and thinking back to our episode. One thing you touched on a handful of her influences. Howard Pyle, and I had never encountered that name before. Can you tell us a little bit about Howard Pyle, who he was and what he did?
Sure. And so there's actually a Swedenborg link there too.
Oh, really?
So,
okay.
Yeah. So as one of the ways that I found a little bit more about this direct connection, the influence of Swedenborgianism on Pamela, was actually reading a series of letters that she wrote to her cousin, Mary Bobby Reed, when she was living in Jamaica, primarily. They kind of span, some of them are when she was in England. But Howard Pyle was a very influential and well-known American artist in the late 19th century. He had a famous school in Delaware. He taught at Drexel for a little bit, but then he mostly operated out of his home in Wilmington. Pamela actually applied to take classes at the school, and she was rejected. There's a couple glancing references to it in the letters. It appears that he didn't feel that she was technically proficient enough, but it is somewhat unclear. She was also friends with his sister because she knows everybody. But he was very interested. He did a lot of illustrations. Sometimes he's known as the father of American illustration. He did focused a lot on colonial revolutionary subjects, but also pirates, which she was fascinated in as a young person. And other things as well, but he was very influential in getting young artists and connecting them with magazines, and did not look down on magazine illustration like a lot of fine artists did at the time.
Right.
And kind of in that way, he was opposed. He was very different than the other major artistic influence on her, which is Arthur Wesley Dow, her instructor at Pratt.
Yeah. And so he was a more sort of in the fine, Dow was a little bit more leaning towards the fine arts. Okay. Interesting.
And through Dow, she became aware of a lot of Japanese principles of art. Dow was connected with Philanosa at and he focused a lot on notan, areas of shading. You may have noticed that she did in a lot of her art from the 1890s especially, but even some of the tarot images, she does a lot of outlining in black.
Yeah.
And that's a technique that she got through Dow, but also through Japanese prints.
I see. Yeah. So this is one kind of other thing. You mentioned that it's possible she got rejected from Pyle's school because she didn't quite have the technical proficiency. I ran across this quote in your book that I thought maybe you could help us understand what he was saying. This is James Whistler talking about Pamela. He says, "She can't paint and she can't draw, but she doesn't have to." What do you think he was getting after with that?
I mean, it gets at, actually, in some ways, the largest body of criticism, and sometimes it's actually praise, but in some ways it's the different side of the same coin in regards to Pamela, that she's so naive and unique and original and quaint and wonderful that she doesn't need to have the same technical proficiency that other people have.
Right. It's almost like she's a savant or something. Like she's not really all there, but she can. Right.
And it speaks to an indefinable something about her personality, for sure. But I think part of it, though, is also because all of these people tended to look down on her because she didn't fit into easily classifiable boxes, especially in regards to her race, her gender expression, and also her class.
Right. And so then so she doesn't make sense to them. She doesn't fit into their spreadsheet, so they kind of just assume she's like, it's easier for them to deal with the fact that maybe she's communing directly with spirits or something, rather than like she's actually a really talented artist who works super hard. Yeah, interesting.
And why can't you be both of those things?
Right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we got to break out of their spreadsheets. No matter what we do. That's
sure.
what we got to do.
That's for
sure. If you had to define her class in this world, what do you think that was like? That's very difficult, I think. But
so it is. I mean, so you do talk a little bit about this in your first podcast. I don't know how much you want me to go over again, but so on both sides, her mother and her father were descended from very wealthy and influential Brooklyn-based families. Her paternal grandfather was the first elected mayor of Brooklyn. He was a state senator from New York. He owned ferries and trains and hospitals and all kinds of things. And on her mother's side, they were publishers and they owned a very influential bookstore in Lower Manhattan. But Charles Edward Smith, which was Pamela's father, was the youngest of Cyrus Smith's children. He wanted to be an artist. He didn't follow into the family business, and we don't really know a lot about why they went to England and exactly when. We know that Pamela was born there, but they were married in New York, and Corinne and Charles did live in New York on 18th Street for some time due to census records. And, there is definitely some mystery about her, not so much about her birth, but about what her race is. Was she adopted? Was there something else going on?
I think in the biography, and I hadn't read this anyplace else, I think you mentioned that Pamela's mother had made some solo trips to Jamaica, right?
It appears that. But again, there's a lot of Smiths, but it does appear that she did. A curious thing, I will say, is that Pamela was born on February 16th, 1878, and her birth was only registered on March 18th, which even for then is evidently a bit of a distance. Yeah. But there was a birth announcement that was published in a paper in London 2 days after. So
I
don't know.
Yeah.
And she did take a lot of transatlantic journeys, including one when she was 3 months old. And so that also would be kind of unusual. But did they just travel back to New York to see family?
Yeah. The amount of travel, she traveled more than like most modern people travel now.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
She definitely travels more than I have in the last 2 years.
Yeah,
but
Yeah.
Yeah.
all
But
of
to
us.
answer your
Yeah.
question about her class, because I kind of went off on a tangent and I
No.
didn't fully, is that so she was born into this definitely wealthy families historically. She appears to have had relative privilege while she was living in England. There was some financial dealings that I'm not going to go into unless you really want me to. There, it's in the book, but they had to leave England relatively quickly, literally in the middle of the night, because of some financial problems with the company that Charles was working for. They come back to Brooklyn, spend a couple months there, and then leave early the next year when she was 11 to go to Jamaica, where he was an auditor for the West India Improvement Company. And so again, probably had relative privilege living in Jamaica. We don't know a whole lot. We know some of those letters I referenced, talk about how, she had a little pony and she drove around the islands. And we know that she did travel around the islands and collect Anansi tales and stuff like that. But after her parents died, both of them were dead by the end of 1899. Before she was, before I guess she would have been 20. She did struggle financially for most of her life. And for many periods of her life, especially after she left London and moved to Cornwall, she had dire poverty. There's letters where she talks about having to kill her last chicken and she doesn't know what she's going to do. And she's like begging people to buy a picture or sell things, or she really struggled financially for quite a bit.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that is interesting. There's something about her. She not only did people seem to struggle to identify her, like we've talked about, but she was certainly willing to let her identity kind of I don't want to say she struggled with it, but she was willing to let it wander a bit, I think. Yeah, and that's kind of one of the interesting things about her.
What do you mean wander?
Well, she's like she would go as deep into Jamaican culture, not to identify as Jamaican, but to really deeply understand that culture. Right. And so she went beyond being an outsider or a visitor in that culture. And then she kind of drifted off to England and very much became, before I started reading this, I always thought she was English before I really started reading. I just kind of assumed she must be. And then to learn these American roots was really fascinating to me. So just that she's sort of a citizen of everything, right? Yeah.
That connection between Jamaica and London and the UK is something that most Americans are oblivious to until you move over there and spend any time there. If you spend time in the south of London, there's an enormous Caribbean population, many of whom have never seen Jamaica.
And most of them immigrated after the Windrush in 1956. But your point is a good one in the sense that there was a lot of English living in Jamaica.
Right.
And she talks about them in her letters, interacting with different families and governor and the consul and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, Elizabeth, what is if you had to pick a project of Pamela's that is either your favorite or you think is maybe the most indicative of what she was like, what would you focus on? Or what would you tell us is like, this is Pamela Colman Smith as a project of hers?
So that's really hard because I think to some degree, just as you were talking about how she immerses herself in different identities, I think she immersed herself in so many different things. I mean, maybe I'll point to the Green Sheaf because we haven't talked about that yet. And I already mentioned Anansi a little bit. And the Green Sheaf is really interesting because it allowed her to bring together a lot of disparate interests. There's, and she was able to connect a lot of members of the Irish literary revival, W.B. Yeats and Lady Gregory and John Millington Synge have stories and drawings in there, and she illustrated a lot of things for them. There's some mystical stuff that's in there as well, with AE and some other less well-known members. There's contributions by Lyceum theater people and Edward Gordon Craig, which was Ellen Terry's son, who is a well-respected theater designer and theater theorist in his own right. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff about pirates, because of course she was very interested in pirates.
That's pretty cool.
But interesting, one of the things that she does not focus on in The Green Sheaf is Anansi, and there's no folktales of Anansi in there. And I've never been able to find anything, mention a letter or anything as to why. And she's not generally one to kind of segment off different parts of her output. One thing that is, to me, is her Anansi Tales, the first collection she publishes in 1899, and she illustrates a volume of folklore by Seamus McManus in Chimney Corners in the same year. And there's actually a fair bit of overlap between some of the drawings that she does. Oh, really? Not that she's like copying things, but like she definitely saw some connections, I think, between Anansi, the trickster spider figure, and the giant that shows up several times in the Seamus McManus volume. And she's so interested in connections between different things. The last piece of The Green Sheaf that I think is indicative of her is there's a large number of contributions by seemingly unknown or maybe pseudonymous. Oh, I can't talk tonight. Pseudonymous.
Is that it?
Yes, that's it.
Now I can. Now I don't know.
Sorry.
The Human Torch was denied a bank loan.
Is that your?
That is the funny warm up from Anchorman.
Oh yeah.
Oh yes, you're right. No, you're exactly right. But she has a lot of. Yeah. She has a lot of contributions by women writers. And they're all over the place. Some of them are critiques, obvious critiques on kind of patriarchal points of view. She herself has this great poem called Alone, which, like, from a verse standpoint is relatively simple. But when it's paired with the illustration of a very pregnant woman, and talks about how this woman is alone wherever she goes. She's not going to have anybody to, call her, give her home, or find, have any kind of family or connection with. And not that the verse itself mentions the pregnancy, but the drawing very much does.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, The Green Sheaf was definitely something that was I was very curious about reading the multiple works on her. I love this DIY, this make the thing attitude that she had. I really, really appreciated it. And it made me wonder how much of The Green Sheaf, how much of that material still is in an archive someplace? Or some of it lost? Like, what's the status of all that?
No, actually, the full run of The Green Sheaf is available in several archives, and even better than that, I mean, a lot of it is reproduced in the Pamela Colman Smith, The Untold Story. Not all of it, but a fair bit of it. But it's actually been digitized, and you can Google it. And the full run has been digitized.
Oh, cool! Very good.
It's part of the Yellow 90s project.
Yeah. How do you think she would have felt about digitizing things? I mean, we got to do it for posterity, but I wonder, like, what that would feel like to her.
So she was very focused on the beautiful handmade object, right? And I will say that the first time that I saw The Green Sheaf, I actually requested it from Dartmouth. At the time, the full run was only available at 2 university libraries in the States, a couple in England. This has since changed, thankfully.
Okay.
But when I requested it from Dartmouth, they didn't even know they had it. It was kept like in a locker somewhere, and the librarian was like, sure, you can have it sent to your institution. And then she gets it a couple of days later and calls me back, and she's like, oh, look at all these people in here. But they did, thankfully, they sent it, and it wasn't like to my home. They sent it to my library archive, and I had to use gloves to handle it. But the paper is all handmade paper. It's gorgeous.
The paper itself is.
Yes.
Wow.
The paper is beautiful. It was called Japan paper, but it just meant that it was like thicker, and it really has, I mean, if you've seen like anything, even the things from the 40s and 50s sometimes that made on that cheap pulp paper is all yellow and like crumply. And I have definitely looked at things in archives from even the late 19th century that are literally falling apart. But the green sheaf is gorgeous. It was all hand colored, so it was printed. And then she went and hand colored every single thing, which took forever.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Then that eats into your profits too, right? I mean, yeah. It's hard to make money doing something like that. But yeah, that does seem like a really, that felt like a project that seemed like she was really doing something she wanted to do. And
for sure.
And also it's indicative of the way she, like we sort of talked about where she's the center, maybe not the center, but she's sort of a center of the cultural movement that she's in. And so it's all kind of getting condensed into these green sheaf things with all these different figures contributing and all the different sort of modes, right? The illustrations and the poetry and the criticism. Yeah, it's a very cool project, And
I really liked how you said that she is the center, because I do like to think of Pamela as the center of bringing together lots of different communities of arts that were often seen as super disparate, even by modernist scholars. And, for so long, Pamela has been relegated to being a footnote in the stories of much more famous people, generally men, but not entirely. But she is a node and an important connection point in her own right, I feel. And
I think that's you spend enough time with her biography and her work, that becomes pretty clear. I think. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So I don't want to spend a ton more time before we go into our After Dark episode. But
we got to tease the After Dark episode. So I know there were some things that we want to. Yeah, we're going to have some. What precisely was it we were going to talk about?
Well, we can't say it precisely.
Well, no, but not precisely. What are we teasing?
It has a spooky connection.
It's going to be a very ooky, spooky special,
and has something that is very well known as a classic of horror.
Oh, that's right.
Okay,
that's
interesting.
Perfect for Halloween.
So this is exclusive to Patreon subscribers. artofdarkpod.com. You can go to patreon.com/artofdarkpod. We even have new merch. We did a new logo.
We do. We have a mug.
You can get a mug. Yeah, it's a well-made object from Bonfire.
That's right.
Maybe not the same as a
seen.
Beautiful. Yeah, right. Yeah. Somebody will ship it to you. Boy, but this is really exciting, and I'm very enthusiastic about this episode because Elizabeth, it's nice to have somebody who's a real, true, deep expert on one of our subjects who I find, having just spent this much time with and around Pamela and her work, I find almost like I don't mean to sound patronizing here, but I have a bit of a grudge on her behalf.
Yeah,
it's frustrating. So it's nice to add to the exposure, and hopefully we're doing that. Yeah. Brad.
Yeah. I feel very much the same way. So I came to Pamela through the tarot. I'm very interested in the tarot, and I definitely call it I try to call it the Smith-Waite deck now. Waite does kind of deserve his name on it, I suppose. Ryder, I don't think does. Nobody even knows who that Joker is, and Smith certainly should be on there. I got a couple things. Maybe this would be kind of our last question, because this was something that we talked about a little bit on the episode, and maybe you can give us some insight. Late in her life, she made a turn to Catholicism.
The one true faith. This is a theme in
Yes.
Art of Darkness. Whenever it comes up,
I was
it's,
really just setting up Kevin for his tagline.
Yeah,
but
right.
but honestly, it's interesting, right? She starts in Swedenborganism, and she works her way through the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and she's touching up against Jamaican folklore and thereby the mythology and the religion. She talked about Obeah, and then she ends up in Catholicism. And I'm curious what you might be able to say about that turn.
Sure. I mean, I could talk a lot about it, but the short version is that it isn't a rejection of her occult interests, right?
Okay.
Which it has been read at, and I think that's a mistake. One of the things, two things, her Bible that she had before she died, there's sketches of pentacles and cups along with drawings of Mary and Jesus and different saints. And I think this is really all a part of how she was very syncretic, and she was interested in connections between different cultural frameworks rather than fully engrossing herself in one and then rejecting it entirely, right? I do think that maybe weirdly for 21st century audiences, Catholicism in the early 20th century was definitely drawing intellectuals and artists that were interested in mystical and spiritual connection, right? Even Waite himself, I mean, he was obviously not a Catholic, but his mother was Catholic, and he was interested in some of the more mystical branches and like not occult, but secret teachings of the Catholic Church, right? Okay. And there was so much interest in the early 20th century in kind of getting at the true roots of the secrets of all the faiths, right? Yeah. And there was definitely a kind of number of artists and writers in England, in London especially, who were interested in that, and they were Catholic as well. I mean, she did convert in 1911. She almost definitely started that process probably shortly after she finished the deck in December of 1909 or so. Okay. She did have several friends who were Catholics. We talked a little bit about Ellen Terry, but Ellen Terry's daughter, Edie Craig, who she was very close with and remained close with for most of her life, her partner, Chris St. John, was a Catholic. And there were other Catholics among the women's suffrage organization that Colman Smith became a member of in 1909. And so that also could have been another way in.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So now the way you've laid that out, it does feel like a little bit more of a natural evolution rather than I don't know, some sudden guilt or whatever.
There's a famous passage by one of Yeats's sisters that talks about it as this kind of renunciation of her bohemian lifestyle, but it really wasn't. Sorry.
Right. No, very, very interesting. So
you could be a cool Catholic. You could be a cool, funky Catholic. It's a big church.
Yeah, that's true. It's the universal church, right? Mm-hmm. So it's it takes all kinds.
You also won't go to hell if you practice Catholicism. Elizabeth is rejecting. She renounces. I am joking.
It's going so well.
This is one of the running themes of Art of Darkness. Every time it comes up. Okay, yes, all right. Okay, Elizabeth, you were going to say something. I can tell.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say that I think another lure for Catholicism was the focus on women. And Mary, of course, but also the saints, and this idea that women within the church, weirdly, right? Because of course, in different countries, in different places, women have definitely been subjugated by the Catholic Church. Sure. But there also, right, is a tradition of women, back to Julian of Norwich, right? This direct, like, spiritual connection, which I also think I don't know for sure, but I think that would have also appealed to her.
Yeah, Marian adoration is a huge part of the Catholic faith, and they do a procession here in St. Paul where they march with a statue of the Virgin Mary from the Capitol over to the cathedral, and it's quite an event. Yeah, yeah, I can see that appeal, that connection.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we'll kind of wind down now. We're gonna, like I said, we're gonna move over to the Patreon episode. But Elizabeth, what could you? How can people contact you if they would like to, or don't? If you don't want to, I mean, I guess that's okay too. We're used to trying to like get engagement, and that's not necessarily everybody's game. But if people want to find your work, I know on your website there's a lot of stuff that you've written. I imagine some of that's behind academic paywalls and things like that. But how can people reach out to you and find out more about you?
I'm on Twitter. I'm Liz Foley O'Connor on Twitter. You can definitely reach me there. You can also email me through my Washington College account. I'm pretty easily findable.
Okay, great. All right, great. Yeah, we're gonna have some links on the show for folks finding that kind of thing.
Yeah, fantastic. And then we are going to pick this up and do another a mini episode for Patreon subscribers, artofdarkpod.com. I'm Kevin Kautzman, Brad Kelly, and Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us. I want to ask you one question here, one more question for the main episode. Do you have a favorite card from the deck?
Oh,
so I think it's actually the Tower card.
It's a good choice. Yeah.
I know. But I think, I could talk about it.
You think what? No, go on. I want to hear it.
Well, I guess the short version is that cataclysmic or big changes were found throughout Pamela's life, right? And one of the things that really has constantly surprised me and learning more and more about her is how she was able to redirect and reinvent herself, and for most of her life at least, to come back from setbacks and to grow through them. And she was always, one of the things she struggled so much with was publishers. She felt that publishers in New York didn't appreciate her, were shortchanging her financially, weren't appreciating her work. And that's one of the reasons why she started her own press, right? Yeah. And
nothing has changed, has it, Kevin?
Nothing changes. And that is an inspiring thing. And I think that's a great place to leave this off. We'll pick this up in the After Dark episode. Elizabeth O'Connor, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right.